My manipulative ex-wife used the legal system to wrongfully get me sentenced to prison. After being released, I decided to turn the tables and got her evicted. The story of how I destroyed her life starts with our divorce. She falsely accused me of being violent, coerced her sister into testifying against me, and managed to get a restraining order along with full custody of our kids. That was a heavy blow. But what came next was devastating. My mother was diagnosed with terminal cancer and given 3 months to live. Her dying wish was to see her grandkids one last time in the hospital, so I violated the restraining order and contacted my ex. I promised not to be in the room, asking only that our kids see their dying grandmother. She laughed and refused, even saying she wouldn't take them to the funeral. She reported me to the police for violating the restraining order, leading to my arrest. Despite understanding my motives, the judge ruled I had breached the order and sentenced me to 4 months in jail. My mother passed away while I was incarcerated, and I never got to say goodbye. When I got out, I was a different person. Anger consumed me, and all I could think about was making my ex-wife, Laura, pay for what she had done. I couldn't go near her due to the restraining order, but I could still ruin her life from afar. With nowhere to go and no one to turn to, I started over. Most of my family had already cut ties with me long before I was locked up. They didn't even call when my mother died. I had no job, no home, no money, and a criminal record, but I had hatred for the woman who had put me in this situation. I eventually found a rundown apartment on the edge of town, the only place I could afford. It was a dump, but it was shelter. I paid the first month's rent with what little money I had left, and the landlord didn't ask many questions. The apartment was in terrible condition. The ceiling leaked, and the heating barely worked, but it was a roof over my head. That first night, I lay on the floor, staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering how my life had come to this. The next day, I went out looking for work. I needed money to survive and, more importantly, to get back at Laura. But finding a job with a criminal record wasn't easy. I spent hours going from place to place, filling out applications, only to be turned away when they saw the gap in my employment history. Eventually, I found a convenience store desperate enough to hire me. It was minimum wage, but it was something. The work was mind-numbing, and the nights were worse, with drunks stumbling in at all hours and the occasional junkie trying to steal a six-pack. But all I could think about was Laura, how she was out there living her life while I was stuck in this pit. Every cent I earned went toward keeping the crappy apartment and buying just enough food to get by. There was no room for anything else. But every night, after dragging myself back to that dump of an apartment, I lay there, thinking about what I was going to do to her, how I was going to make her pay for what she did to me and my mom. As I started to stabilize my finances, my plan to destroy Laura came into full effect. The first step was to find out where she worked. After some digging, I discovered she was managing a small boutique downtown. It seemed like a cushy job, and I thought it would be a shame if she got fired. I figured it was the perfect place to start. I bought a cheap, raggedy computer from a pawn shop and created a bunch of fake online profiles. Each profile had its own personality, complete with names, birthdays, hobbies, and even photos I pulled from random corners of the internet. The first profile was of a middle-aged woman who loved floral patterns and had a soft spot for her golden retriever. She was the type of customer who'd frequent Laura's boutique and be devastated if the customer service didn't meet her high standards. The second profile was of a younger guy, tech-savvy and quick to post a review if something ticked him off. He had a poor temper and would be the kind of customer who noticed every little thing and had no problem calling out bad service when he saw it. The third was an older man, the grumpy type who was impossible to please but whose words carried weight because of his age and status as an army veteran. Not a good look to be rude to him. These people had to seem real, so no one would ever question the stories I was about to tell. As I moved on to writing the fake reviews, my anger built up again. The thought of Laura sitting comfortably in that boutique, living her life like nothing had happened, made my blood boil. My mother's dying wish replayed in my head, and the thought of Laura reporting me to the cops, like I was nothing, broke my heart. I wasn't even worth giving my dying mother one last moment of happiness. I started typing the first review, keeping it simple, just a comment about a rude remark Laura had made to a customer. But that wasn't enough. I needed to do more, to make her feel the way I had felt in that jail cell, knowing my mother had passed away alone because of her. The next review was worse. I made up stories of Laura snapping at customers, making them feel unwelcome, and even insulting them under her breath. It felt good, like I was finally getting back at her. It didn't matter how long it took, or how many reviews I had to write. I wouldn't stop until I knew that Laura was suffering. As the fake complaints started to pile up, the boutique's owner couldn't ignore them. Every day I submitted new profiles and new fake reviews. Eventually, the owner launched an investigation into Laura's behavior. Of course, Laura denied everything, but the damage was done. The owner couldn't risk losing customers because of a problem employee, so she fired Laura. I found out through a friend who I asked to walk in and ask specifically for Laura. The first step to ruining her life was complete. Laura had taken my mother's last wish away from her, so I took Laura's job away from her. But that was just the beginning. Next, I turned my attention to her house, the house we had bought together when we were still married and things were good. The thought of her losing it filled me with a twisted sense of satisfaction. I started digging through public records, looking for anything that could cause her problems. After a few days of searching, I hit the jackpot. Laura was behind on her property taxes. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was enough to cause issues if brought to the right attention, so I did just that. I acted like a concerned neighbor and sent an anonymous tip to the city, claiming the house might be abandoned or poorly maintained. This led to an inspection, and sure enough, they found a few code violations. Nothing serious, but enough to violate her HOA and make her life difficult. But I wasn't done yet. I had an old friend from high school who worked as a code enforcement officer. We hadn't talked in years, but I reached out, reminded him of the good old days, and slipped him a bribe to expedite the process. Soon enough, Laura got an eviction notice due to the unpaid taxes and code violations. She was given a short time to vacate the house. I imagined her panic when she received that notice. She had nowhere to go, lost her job, and now she was losing her home. Everything was falling into place just the way I wanted. With Laura jobless and homeless, I knew I had the upper hand. I loved my kids and would have loved to be with them after the divorce, but I had to be careful. My parole officer would have loved an excuse to throw me back in jail. I couldn't make direct contact with her, so I thought long and hard about how I could strategically gain custody. Eventually, I decided to use my sister as a go-between. She was hesitant at first. She was the one family member who hadn't abandoned me, and I'm forever grateful for that. She's a good person, and she didn't want to get involved in something that could land her in trouble. But I convinced her that I was just trying to do what was best for the kids. With her help, I petitioned for custody. I hired a top-notch lawyer, one who knew how to spin a story in court. We argued that Laura was unfit to care for the kids due to her unstable living situation and lack of income. My lawyer painted me as a reformed man, someone who had made mistakes but had learned from them. He emphasized that I had a stable job and a decent home and was ready to be the father my kids needed. The courtroom was tense. But I knew I had this in the bag. Laura was on the other side, looking worn out and desperate. She tried to fight back, giving every sob story she could to the judge, talking about how she lost her job and got evicted, trying to paint me as some kind of monster out to ruin her life. But I kept my cool. She might have tried to make me look like the bad guy, but I wasn't the one who showed up looking like I couldn't take care of my own kids. I had a job, a place to live, and had spent the last few months getting my act together. Laura was practically begging the judge to believe her, but I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't buying it. The judge didn't care about her excuses or her claims that I was behind everything that had gone wrong in her life. What mattered to him were the facts. I had a stable income and a decent home, and she was homeless and jobless. He granted me full custody of the kids. Laura nearly crumbled right there. I felt a sick satisfaction watching her break like that. And now, with the kids living under my roof, she's left with nothing but memories of how good things used to be. I'll admit, part of me felt empty after it was all done. I thought winning would fill that void, but watching her lose everything still felt damn good. The first few weeks with the kids were strange. I thought getting them back would make everything better, but it made things worse. Emily and Jacob were distant. They didn't trust me. They missed their mom, and it was clear that no matter how hard I tried, they wouldn't stop asking about her. It took a lot of time for me to get to know them, and I really did try. Eventually, I realized it was incredibly selfish and petty of me to deny them contact with their mother. By doing so, I was becoming everything I hated about Laura. I didn't want to hate myself. I got my sister to reach out to Laura and tell her about my proposal the kids could visit her on weekends. Just because I didn't want to speak to my ex-wife didn't mean my kids shouldn't have a mother. She did love them, after all. Eventually, we managed to reach a nice middle ground. The kids really like their mom, and to be honest, I'm glad they do. I want them to grow up in as stable an environment as possible, given everything that has happened. Laura and I even met once, saying hi to each other when I dropped the kids off at her place. I have no interest in ever getting back with her, but if we can develop a nice co-parenting relationship, I wouldn't be mad.